Hello, YouTube. This is Alzoru, your friend and storyteller. Welcome to another story from Nafine. This time, our journey takes us into the Great Swamp in Kaharne. It's a sleepy little town called Halkuu'Seshi, and our storyteller is a Kermool, otherwise known as a Wairana or sea-serpent. If you want a description of those guys, go into my first video. Well, first video in this series, that is. A Halkuu'Seshi is a monstrous fairy creature standing at about 10 feet tall, with 4 purple eyes, an obese body, long arms, a toothy grin, and the ability to produce poison, as well as some spell-casting abilities. With that out of the way, let us begin. I'm a male Kermool. And last year, I had the worst experience of my life. It started as a day like any other. I'd eaten a few merm and mermro for my breakfast, and playfully argued with my wife, a human woman named Clara, over our preferred types of fish. This was our way of goofing with each other, since we met at a fish restaurant and were shocked at each other's choice of fish dishes. It was a silly way to meet, and at that time, it was an equally silly way for us to flirt. I swam to work as usual, and I took the primary waterway to the local tavern, where I worked as one of the chefs. Specifically, I was working with cheese and vegetables on most days. But on that day, I was on call to make pastries. Our pastry chef had fallen ill, and since I was the only other chef who knew most of his recipes, I got the part. Sugar buns, jelly-filled puffs, and honeyed local fruits were my main focus that day. It was a perfectly normal day at work otherwise, complete with nice customers and really rude customers. One rude customer told me he hoped I got lost in the deep swamp for giving him bad sugar buns. Here's the thing, though. The main waterway back to my house was blocked by a fallen log that night. Sure, I could have crossed land and found other way, but us Kermool can be clumsy on land. I know I am. So I took another path, not quite sure where any of them led. I tried to go whichever way made sense in my head, but as you may be able to guess, I got a bit lost. Sure enough, I ended up in a deep, remote patch of swampland. The swamps are dangerous outside the cities and sometimes even in them. So you can imagine I was not thrilled to be lost out in the deep swamp, especially so close to nightfall. The sun was setting, the night was close at hand, and, well, I just kept trying to navigate the path I was on, but the water just got murkier. My gills were starting to feel clogged, and I had to spend half an hour on land trying to clean out the muck. Now it was dark, and I was unsure which way was back. I trudged on through the thickening water, keeping my head out of it so as not to clog my gills. But the water was practically turning into mud here, and unpleasant smelling mud at that. I was close to puking when I looked around in the darkness. That stench caught in my nose, and the sounds of the swamp all around me, when suddenly the swamp goes quiet. Hardly a sound other than my movements. I haul myself onto a piece of land to rest for a moment and start to get freaked out by the silence. I know it sounds cliche, but it was too quiet. No crickets, no frogs, no non-hen birds, no splashing fish, or even a breeze. Complete silence. I looked around, and in the distance I saw 4 purple orbs. I froze in place and began to back up, hoping to Milky and her husband that it wasn't what I thought it was, but as the orbs blinked, I knew. They were eyes. Eyes that stared into my soul and slowly got closer. I had heard tales of Halkuu'Seshi, and I knew this was one of them. I had to hope it didn't see me despite looking right at me, but I heard its deep, horrible, guttural laugh just before the lights all blinked out. I swam out of there as fast as my tail fin would carry me, looking back over my shoulder and around me to see if I had lost it. Spent all night trying to get back to town, and eventually I did. The city guards greeted me and escorted me home. My wife had become worried when I never came home. Can't say I blame her. I took that work day off to rest at home with my wife. I told her my story. She assumed I had hallucinated the event, citing that I was probably exhausted and not thinking clearly. I couldn't blame her. She wasn't from Kaharne. She didn't know the stories, and she didn't know the horrid truth. But she soon would. I passed out of my bed and stayed blacked out for 2 whole hours, but the moment when I woke up, I heard its laugh nearby. It would follow me home, just like they always do. I could hear it scratching the outside of my houseboat and bumping into its underside. I felt a cold chill as I felt a claw graze my spine. But when I spun around to face it, I saw nothing but a puddle of black goo where it should have been. Told my wife everything and showed her the puddle, and when she examined it, she threw up from the fumes and passed out. I dragged her out of there, knowing that the fumes would be deadly if I left her there for long. I tried to clean up the ichor, but I had to hold my breath. I had to take short breaks to breathe while dealing with that poison. The next day while I was at work, nothing happened to me specifically. Just a boring day at work, though my colleagues thought I was making up the story to get free leave. When I came home, however, my wife had been attacked. Not killed, but attacked. Her clothes were ripped and torn, and she was bleeding quite a bit. I gave her first aid and went out to buy a weapon. An old, slightly rusty sword with a wavy edge. I gave it to my wife when she came in to order her, and I told her to keep herself safe with it. I, of course, reported the incident to the guards, and they were able to verify her wounds, and since my alibi was airtight, people began to know something was up. My wife now knew I wasn't crazy, too. After that day, I stopped going to work and stayed in my house with my father's old attack sword in hand, jumping at shadows, trying to catch the creatures that taunted me. I think I hit it once, but it didn't deter the creature from coming back. After 8 sleepless nights of hearing that horrible laugh, after scratching, howling, and other horrible noises, I went to my local priest and got his advice. He gave me a silvered longsword and told me to play dead in my house and wait for it to approach. Then I should lob off its head, salt and spice the neck stump, and bury the body in the driest place I could find. Lastly, I was to drive the sword through a darn thing's skull and leave it there. The fact that I'm here and still alive should tell you I made it out alive. But, while I was playing dead, I got to see it looming over me, and when I saw it there, ready to devour my exhausted carcass, you'd better believe I was horrified, and quietly praying for Melky and Kaharne to guide my sword. And they did. It's buried now and taken care of. Ever since then, I've heard no laughter, no haunting and taunting, never been attacked by invisible claws, nor had to clean up toxic black sludge. I lost my job, and my wife and I had a strained relationship for a bit afterward. But now, I'm the head chef at that same restaurant, making more gold than I ever did as a minor chef, and certainly enough to repair the damage done by that monster. As for the wife and I, we adopted a pet in the form of a giant Kahan lobster, and are considering adopting a child. As for me personally, next time I find myself needing to take an alternate route home, I think I'll just crawl over land till I find a familiar route.